I stood still at the edge of the ballroom, the train of my navy dress trailing behind me like a ripple in still water. All conversation seemed to stop. Glasses paused mid-air, laughter caught mid-breath. I felt hundreds of eyes turn in my direction, not at me, but at the man beside me. He said nothing, just adjusted his cufflinks with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need introduction. Even the maitre d' did a double take. A few guests squinted, trying to place the face. Someone near the champagne bar let out a soft gasp. My parents hadn't seen me yet, but they would. The room was pure spectacle chandeliers dripping crystal, violins whispering elegance, waiters gliding across marble with trays of gold-rimmed hors d'oeuvres. It was supposed to be the night they announced my engagement to Ethan Monroe, the man they handpicked for me like a business acquisition. But I'd brought someone else. I took another step forward. The air shifted. Conversations fizzled into whispers. My mother, mid-toast, turned and her expression crumbled in real time. My father, rigid at the bar, gripped his glass tighter. Ethan, standing near the stage, dropped his smirk so fast it looked like he'd swallowed his own name. I didn't smile, not yet. Julian leaned in and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "They weren't expecting you to bring me, were they?" I whispered back. They weren't expecting me to bring power they couldn't control. And with that, we stepped fully into the light, two silhouettes framed in gold, about to rewrite the rules of the evening. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind that used to mean comfort. Roasted chicken, green beans sautéed with garlic, and the smell of Mom's lemon pie cooling on the counter. We were 3 bites into the main course when my father cleared his throat. "I had a conversation with Charles Monroe this week," he began, using his linen napkin to dab at the corner of his mouth like he was announcing a new business merger. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Charles Monroe, as in Charles Monroe, founder of Monroe Developments, golf buddy of my father, and billionaire donor to half the state's political campaigns. Dad continued, "You've met his son, haven't you, Ethan?" "Yes, unfortunately." Tall, plastic smiled, full of empty compliments and quiet misogyny. Ethan was the type of man who referred to women as assets, and once asked me at a fundraiser if I was the pretty daughter or the smart one. I had smiled and replied, "Whichever one makes you more uncomfortable. I think it's time we talked seriously about your future," Dad said. Voice calm, deliberate. "You're 30 now. It's time to think about stability. Ethan is smart, successful, and willing to settle down. And we think he would be perfect for you." I blinked, once, twice. Then I laughed quietly at first, then louder. My mother flinched. "You're serious?" I asked. Dead silence answered. "We've always made sacrifices for you," Mom added, reaching across the table to place a well-manicured hand on mine. "It's time you consider the bigger picture for the family." There it was. Not love, not compatibility, not happiness. The family. I pulled my hand away. Dad's voice dropped an octave. "If you won't even consider this match, don't expect us to continue supporting your lifestyle." I set my fork down gently. "My lifestyle," I repeated. "You mean the apartment I pay for, the job I worked 10 years to build, the career you still call a phase." My mother sighed as if I were a child refusing to share a toy. "You're being dramatic," she whispered. "We only want what's best for you." No, they wanted what was best for their image. This wasn't a proposal. It was an ultimatum wrapped in heirloom silverware and lemon pie. I stood from the table. "I'm not for sale. Not to Ethan. Not to you. You'll regret this," my father said calmly, like he was making a prediction, not a threat. I didn't respond. I walked out the door and left the smell of comfort food behind, knowing I'd just shattered whatever fantasy they were trying to build and that they'd do anything to rebuild it without me. 2 days passed before I even said Ethan's name out loud again. It wasn't about spite. It was about clarity. I needed to know who my parents had tried to barter me off to the man they were so desperate for me to marry that they threatened to erase me financially if I didn't comply. So I did what I do best. I investigated. I opened my laptop, poured a mug of black coffee, and typed Ethan Monroe into my firm's secure research database. My firm didn't just audit companies, we audited people, background checks, asset tracing, corporate liability reports. We'd unearth things no journalist could reach without a subpoena. Ethan had a file. It was thicker than I expected. On the surface, he was everything my parents had advertised: Ivy League alum, CEO of Monroe Developments, keynote speaker at half a dozen real estate summits, but underneath something else, something less polished, less clean. 3 sexual harassment complaints, all quietly settled out of court within the past 5 years. 2 lawsuits alleging investor deception, one involving a development project that never got built but still collected advance deposits from 20 families, most of whom never saw a refund, and a sealed report from a private school in Connecticut expulsion at 17 for behavior unbecoming of a student leader. The phrase chilled me. I knew what that usually meant. This wasn't just a man with ambition. He was a man with protection, the kind that came from money, lawyers, and influential parents who wiped up messes with foundation donations. The more I read, the more sick I felt. Not just for me. For every woman he'd smiled at with that fake toothpaste commercial grin. For every investor who shook his hand and believed the gloss. And worst of all, for my parents, because they knew. They had to have known. No way my father, a man who once audited my high school boyfriend's GPA before letting me go to prom, didn't dig into Ethan's history. They just didn't care. They wanted the merger, not a marriage, a brand alignment. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. If they were playing chess with my life, I'd show them what it looked like when the pawn flips the board. I didn't need a fake boyfriend. I needed leverage. Not someone to hold my hand, but someone who could walk into that ballroom and make people whisper for all the right reasons. Someone who could tilt the social scales, not by charm, but by sheer presence. So I called Julian. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, not since he sent me a bottle of champagne when I landed my promotion. No card, just a sticky note. Told you they'd regret underestimating you. Classic Julian, understated, razor sharp, and always watching from a few steps ahead. He picked up on the second ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you," he said, his voice as calm and clipped as I remembered. "Who do I need to bury?" I smiled. "No graves, just an appearance." He laughed lightly. "That sounds more dangerous." We met the next morning at a quiet cafe tucked between 2 art galleries, neutral ground. No paparazzi, no boardroom energy. He wore a navy coat, black gloves, and that same unreadable expression he'd perfected during our MBA days. I laid out everything: the forced engagement, the threat of being cut off, Ethan's trail of red flags, my parents' obsession with status. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You want to use me to crash your own engagement party?" I nodded. I don't need theatrics, just presence. Just enough for them to realize they bet on the wrong man. Julian tapped his fingers on the coffee cup. "You know I hate these kinds of games." "I know," I said, "but you owe me one." That was true, and we both knew it. Years ago, when no firm would take a chance on a scholarship kid with no pedigree, I'd slid his resume across a partner's desk and said, "Trust me." Now Julian ran a $1 billion impact fund and made headlines that rattled old money investors from coast to coast. He smiled, then slow, knowing. "I'll be there," he said. "Tell me when to walk in." The final warning came wrapped in white linen and passive aggression. Another Sunday dinner. Another round of carefully plated silence and soft threats. My mother had set the table with the heirloom china, like aesthetics could soften what they were about to say. Dad cut into his roast duck with surgical precision. "We need a decision, sweetheart," he said, without looking up. The Monroes have booked the ballroom. Invitations are being drafted. I sipped my water, slowly. I never agreed to marry Ethan. Mom's smile didn't crack, but her grip on the serving spoon tightened. You've been dragging your feet. That's agreement enough for the press and for Charles Monroe. I set my glass down. You're willing to force me into a public engagement for PR. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. We're willing to protect our family's future. You either attend the engagement party and make the announcement, or... He trailed off, or what I asked, already knowing. Mom folded her napkin with unnecessary care. While we begin the process of removing you from the family trust, the apartment, your health care, your name on the foundation board, all of it. There it was, not a threat, a transaction. I nodded slowly. I see. I hope you do, Dad said, finally looking me in the eye. No one wants this to get ugly. I forced a smile, and of course not. Let's keep things elegant. That night, I opened the RSVP email from the event planner and filled it out with 2 quick clicks. Will attend, +1. No name needed, not yet. I received a text from Ethan an hour later, looking forward to celebrating our future together. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Then I didn't. Instead, I pulled Julian's message back up and typed 2 words, "We're on." The ballroom sparkled like something out of a royal fantasy floor-to-ceiling chandeliers. Crystal flutes pre-filled with champagne, and a string quartet tucked into the corner playing Vivaldi like they'd been trained since birth. It was excessive, elegant, and unmistakably curated. Nothing in this room was accidental. I stood outside the venue for a full minute before going in, not because I was nervous, but because I knew what I was about to do would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone in that room who thought they already knew the ending. Inside, guests were already mingling. Familiar faces from boardrooms and country clubs, my father's business associates, my mother's charity circle, political donors. Legacy families who believed marriages were contracts and daughters were assets. And then there was Ethan. He was already holding court near the stage, laughing too loudly at his own joke, a champagne flute dangling carelessly between 2 fingers. His suit was tailored to perfection navy with a burgundy tie that matched the floral centerpieces. He looked like a man seconds away from making a power play. He hadn't seen me yet. Good. The MC tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here to celebrate the soon-to-be engagement of 2 incredible people, Ethan Monroe and... I stepped into the room. The heads started to turn. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Ethan's smile froze. My mother's face went pale. My father whispered something to the man next to him, and the seat beside me, still empty, was about to become the most watched chair in the entire room. I pulled out my phone and typed a single word, now. The message was sent. 1 word, 1 cue. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and walked calmly toward the front of the room, heels tapping against polished marble with rhythmic certainty. Conversation slowed, eyes followed. My mother rose halfway from her seat, unsure whether to smile or scold. Ethan took a few steps toward me, arms slightly extended, rehearsed grin locked into place. Finally, he said, as if I were late. Was worried you'd get cold feet. I brought someone, I said, just loud enough for those around us to hear. Hope that's all right. He blinked. You what? And then the doors opened. Not in a burst, not with dramatic fanfare. Just a clean, deliberate swing of glass and brass. The kind that said someone important has arrived. Julian stepped into the room like he owned it. He didn't wear a name tag or a flash of title. He didn't need to. He wore a black tailored suit. No tie. Wristwatch sleek and discreet. His gaze scanned the room like it was a board meeting, calculating, calm, uninterested in applause but aware it was coming. The reaction was slow, then seismic. First, the murmurs. Is that? Oh my God. Wait, is that Julian Wells? The name passed through the crowd like a fuse catching fire. Julian Wells, founder of Wells Equity Group, the man who'd publicly pulled funding from 2 major firms for ethics violations, the one who turned down a White House advisory role twice. And now, he was walking across the ballroom toward me like we'd been arriving together for a decade. Ethan paled. My father went stiff. My mother sat back down, slowly, like her knees had betrayed her. Julian stopped beside me, looked Ethan up and down with a glance so brief it might have been mistaken for disinterest, but wasn't. "Good evening," Julian said, shaking Ethan's hand with the kind of grip that said, "I know who you are and who you're not." "Julian," I said, turning to the room, "everyone, thank you for coming. I know tonight was meant to celebrate an engagement, but I'd like to make a slight adjustment." A silence fell so hard, you could hear the air waiting. I lifted my champagne flute. "To independence," I said, raising it just above my eye level, "and to never settling for less than what you deserve, even when it's dressed up in a navy suit and family expectations." The crowd blinked. Ethan choked on his own breath. Julian clinked his glass against mine. "Cheers," he said. The cameras clicked. Someone gasped. And just like that, the narrative changed. They followed me into the hallway like shadows, frantic, fractured, and finally afraid. The second the ballroom door clicked shut behind me and Julian, I heard my mother's heels stabbing into the marble. Then came my father's voice, low and seething. What the hell was that? I turned slowly, letting them see my face calm, composed, and utterly uninterested in performance. "That," I said, "was me taking back the narrative." My mother looked like she might cry, or scream, maybe both. "You embarrassed us." "No," I corrected, "you embarrassed yourselves. I just held up a mirror." My father stepped forward, jaw tight, that corporate edge rising in his posture. "Do you even know what you've done bringing him here, in front of Charles, in front of investors?" Julian stood slightly behind me, silent, arms crossed, exuding just enough presence to remind them they were no longer in control. "You mean bringing someone who actually respects me?" I shot back. "Or someone who doesn't need to leverage marriage to build credibility?" My mother reached out, fingers grazing my arm. "You could have handled this privately." I pulled back. "You made it public the moment you planned a party to announce an engagement I never agreed to." Their silence was telling, not regretful, just stunned that their daughter, the one they once could maneuver like a chess piece, had flipped the board. Finally, my father's voice cracked the silence again. "Who is he really?" Julian stepped forward. "Someone you'll likely be working with if you'd like to keep your real estate holdings in the North Corridor." My parents stared. Julian offered a nod. Wells Equity closed on a controlling share of Monroe's private trust this morning. My mother's lips parted. "That's impossible." "Call Charles," I said, already turning away. "Ask him how the market favors men who respect women now." They didn't stop me when I walked out. Julian opened the car door without a word, and for the first time in my life, the silence behind me felt like peace. The messages started pouring in the next morning, not from my parents, but from guests, distant relatives, old classmates who had seen clips from the party circulating online. Some were supportive, others were stunned. A few tried to be neutral, as if neutrality ever truly existed in family politics. My parents didn't call. Ethan didn't either. I guess silence was the only card they had left to play. But I wasn't waiting for a response. Not this time. Instead, I poured my energy into something that was mine, fully mine. I launched an initiative with Julian's firm, a scholarship and mentorship program for young women in finance and law who had the skills but not the family names. We called it the Choice Fund. A few weeks later, while reviewing applications, I got a single envelope in the mail reel paper, actual handwriting. It was from my mother. Inside was a photo from years ago, me, maybe 10, holding a spelling bee trophy in one hand and a chocolate ice cream cone in the other, chin smudged, eyes beaming. On the back, she'd written, "I forgot who you were for a while. Thank you for reminding me." There was no apology, but there was honesty, and for once, that was enough. I didn't go home for Christmas. I booked a solo trip to the coast, instead a little cabin by the cliffs where I could walk barefoot in the sand and fall asleep to waves that didn't demand anything of me. And as the year turned, I finally understood I hadn't lost anything that night in the ballroom. I'd reclaimed everything.